So the last episode, we went from base saturations to working through the economics. And if you guys are anything like me, you're probably wondering, how do you have the confidence, right? How do you have the confidence to talk to a grower and say, yeah, you can potentially cut all of your phosphate out. You could potentially cut 150 pounds of your potash out. How do you do that? And I think the answer is simple, because, and you have to go back to week one, right? You got to go all the way back to week one, and the answer lies in there. Because of being vertically integrated, that word is usually used to talk about in business, where nobody can disrupt us, right? If you're vertically integrated, we don't got to worry about the supply chain of these outside influencing factors. They don't worry about it. When we talk about being vertically integrated, we talk about it from this standpoint. We talk about it because we feel like we're fairly intimate with our microbes, for lack of a better word. From isolation to fermentation to formulation, it's all done in-house. So we know what these microbes are, and we know what their capabilities are. So when we come to you, or when one of our BW reps, one of our grower dealers comes to you, they're working off this same information, right? They're looking at, this is what we would call a capability chart. So this is a 401 capability chart, and it's basically telling you what the microbes are. They're numbered on the left-hand side, and what are their capabilities, right? So everything on the left-hand side is a remediation aspect. So there is some sort of remediation that is happening in the soil with the 401, which only makes sense, right? Because after all, Dr. Farley, who is a PhD microbiologist and plant physiologist, he wasn't focused on that to start with, right? He was focused on remediating soils, the petroleum hydrocarbons. So it only makes sense that he brings microbes with those capabilities. And so for those of you that maybe don't understand what that is they have the ability to turn in a negative, like a benzene, a toluene, an ethylene, or ethylbenzene, naphthalene, paraffin, right? All of those things, they have the ability to convert them as a food source. So they can turn that in and use a negative, right? That would be a hydrocarbon, would be a negative thing in the soil. However, those microbes have the ability to turn them in as a food source and use them to give you phosphorus, right, or nitrogen, or all of these things, whether it be iron or sulfur, a whole gamut of things. So when we talk to you about that, that's really where this is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, because we're breaking those hydrocarbons down on the left side and making simple carbons out of it, food source. And then on the right side, we've got, like you say, phosphorus solubilizers, N2 fixers, diazotrophs, ammonification. Excuse me, I can't spit it out. Ammonifying bacteria. So there's a plethora of what our strains of biology are doing in that 401 product.
So you move over to 501, and so maybe, as we start to shift a little bit more away from the agronomy and more into the products, maybe we should take a little bit of time. And so Sean, let's go back and we look at 401, explain where or all of the applications that 401 could be used in, and product names that maybe don't necessarily say 401 but have 401 microbes in them.
I think that's a great point, Bodie, because 401 is the team technology, and so that is the foundation of several products. And the reason being is 401 is a product that we like in furrow. It's kind of has its best fit as an in furrow application. And we know that, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a large percentage of farmers that don't and don't have a plan to, at any, in the near future, to add an in furrow liquid system to their planter, right? And so, with that being said, we want them to be able to use this technology. And so 401, you're going to see that product as 401. You would see that product as Environoc ST, which is a concentrated version of 401 that could be an overtreat for seed treatment, or it could be a foundational piece of a seed treatment if you're, in the seed treating business. There's Biocast. There's Biocast Plus, which is a combination of 401 and the 501 or meltdown technology. so that's the ways you're going to find, most predominantly going to find the 401 is, and the biocast is the reason why it's not just called 401 is biocast is 401 plus organic acids and a food source. And so it has a food source in it to sustain that biology until, it gets into the soil and starts doing its work. We use that product foliarly a lot. It also gets used in furrow some, but it's typically would be a kind of a foliar product. Biocast Plus, again, that's a product that is biocast, which is the 401 plus a food source, plus we add in the 501 technology, which is kind of known as our meltdown product. And that's a product for someone that maybe doesn't have the in-furrow capability and also doesn't want to make a separate trip, whether that's fall or in the spring with a burn down to apply that meltdown. They can get that product already pre-mixed and apply that product together.
So can't forget about Entrust.
Entrust, great
Relatively
example.
new product. The 401 team is in there that we use that as a biological nitrogen management piece. Had some data that came off 53 or 4 locations last year, all across the U.S., the upper Midwest, North Carolina, really to the Dakotas. Had some really strong trials against your Instincts and Centuros and things like that.
And it's not a nitrification inhibitor, or it's not a
nope, it's
like those products.
Simply using microbes to consume, convert, and release nitrogen at a later date, rather than to kill off your nitrifying bacteria that would convert it and release it. Biocast also can be used in a pre-plant or post-emerge broadcast application. So that's where the biocast came from. I'm thinking of broadcast. But yeah, well, we got 401 is in some advanced too.
That's right.
So we talked a little bit about 501. You heard Sean reference 501 or meltdown, and at this point, if you're searching us online, if you're looking at our catalog online, you might open it up and be like, gosh darn, there's 50 products here. Where do I start? How do I make sense of it all? Really, that's what we want to make this simple, right? So 401 is the base team of plant growth promoting microbes. 501 is the team that was originally designed for cellulose, lignin, chitin. So think about residue degradation. That's what it was originally designed for. So 501 and 401 are the base teams, and then those products then go off into other products. So 501 gets blended with organic acids, creates meltdown. 501 and 401, thing to note, both OMRI approved. Meltdown is not, simply because of the organic acids that are used in it. Biocast Plus, as Sean referenced earlier, which is Biocast Plus 501. So again, this is just maybe expanding a little bit, if you will, on our confidence level, right? We talked about, or I asked the question to start this off is, how do you feel confident, right? I mean, you were on the other side. You got sucked into the snake oil lifestyle by me.
Right.
How do we have the confidence to be able to talk about, reduction of fertilizer? And really, if you think about it back to when I started here, I kind of think about it. When I told the owners that the condition that I had to come and work here was that I wanted to bring 365. I wanted to bring soils and tissues to understand what our products were doing. If I was going to come and work here, and they didn't flinch, right? And I thought, for me, that was extremely impactful. We're dealing in what many call snake oils or foo-foo juice or however other many names that they have for it, but they were willing to step out and to take the steps to prove what their microbes are doing. And again, they have the confidence because of the bench level, because of the capability testing that we just showed, but this is just to simplify, right? Don't get caught up in the names of the microbes, right? There's some really long ones. This is the part that really matters. So when we talk about a diazotroph, what is a diazotroph, Sean?
It fixes nitrogen from the nitrogen in the air.
So almost like soybeans?
Very much like soybeans. So it pulls the nitrogen that's in the air, pulls it into the soil, and converts that into inorganic N for the plant to then utilize.
And so you're saying that the 401 microbes contain some diazotrophs?
Sure does. Matter of fact, it contains quite a few of them. to be completely honest. And not just in quantity, but in the number of different strains of biology within that product that are diazotrophic.
So ammonifying microbes, I heard you talk about that one a little bit earlier, and you also referenced something off of a soil test. So you said something about ammonifying microbes. You said there was something on a soil test you were looking at. What is that?
So when we did the video about where we were first looking at the soil test, and we got into that a little bit of a nitrogen discussion, kind of got off the rails a little bit talking about what we were learning from that soil test. I talked about inorganic nitrogen and organic nitrogen, and that's what these ammonifying microbes do. They convert that in that's not plant available, but it's in the soil, and make that plant available. And so we have a couple dozen ammonifying microbes between the 401, 501 combination to be able to do that, to convert that in that's there and make it available to the plant.
And we've obviously talked, we've been no stranger talking about phosphorus. So what do we have that addresses those?
We've got phosphate or phosphorus solubilizing microbes. I think 401 by itself has 5 phosphorus solubilizing microbes. And so where Bodie's talked about on his farm, where they're utilizing, and he talked about the farm in Iowa that had the 300 bushel average or 302 bushel average corn this year, utilizing these products, they are making more phosphorus available and raising the soil test, and at the same time, they haven't been using traditional MAP or DAP.
So, and then we just talked about 501, we talked about the degradation, the cellulose, lignin, chitin, starch, waxes, oils, right? We talked about that, taking complex carbons, making them available. They also have the bioremediation side. I'm looking, we've got petroleum hydrocarbon, pesticides and herbicides. What's Sideriphore?
Sideriphores are, what we've got on here is iron magnets, okay? And so these make more iron available in the soil. And so what you saw, we talked about this on the soil test that you had, right?
Yep.
Iron is one that as we go through the season tends to get locked away and we don't have a lot of access to iron. And so we saw from the soil test, when you have a high phosphorus solubility, which is good, it means your phosphorus isn't locked away, but we can also see times where iron's a little bit low, and believe it or not, you know, it's a required element to grow a crop.
Well, that makes sense, because as I work with growers out in Iowa, you know, they got some of those high pH environments where they actually have IDC.
Iron deficiency chlorosis,
yeah,
that's right.
And I've had growers report back, you know, where we used our biology, you know, we used seed treatment followed by biocast, we didn't see the IDC, and guys were typically spraying soy green, you know, could be upwards of $20 an acre just in that product. So I guess that was interesting to see, you know, firsthand experience from growers. Nodulating, wait a second. So you're telling me that we got bacteria in there that are going to help with nodules?
Yeah, especially the 401 team. So the biocast and the 401, they have, you know, some nodulating bacteria there. And so, you know, if you're going into where you start hearing about utilizing some nodulating bacteria is, you know, if you haven't grown soybeans for a long period of time, you know, and you need to inoculate those beans. Well, we don't really need to do that because 401 has that. Another thing is you're seeing a lot of guys as they begin to push for higher yields. You know, we've played with nitrogen applications, and we kind of know where we are there. But there are folks as they get into higher yield environments are choosing to re-inoculate maybe beans every year to try to make sure that there's plenty of nitrogen fixation going on there. And so we've got ammonifying bacteria, so we're making some nitrogen available, and we've got N2 fixing if you use that, and plus we have the nitrogen fixing relationship to add those rhizobia and get those going and get nodulation on our soybeans as well, or, you know, something like that.
So when that 401 capability chart came up, you mentioned earlier that 401 could be put in furrow, it could be put in biocast for broadcast, it could go biocast plus, it could go within trust, it's an advanced. But you said something about Environoc ST. And then I just heard you talking about the fact that we have nodulating. So is Environoc ST different than everything else? Or are you telling me that I get nodulating bacteria with Environoc ST plus everything else? I get the phosphate solubilizers, the ammonifiers, the diazotrophs. I get ones that produce hormones, rooting hormones. I get all of that?
It's all there. Yeah, it's all there. Plus, we've got some research data, and we can throw this behind us when we, you know, with this as well, where we have cold germ tests and worm germ tests and that sort of stuff, where we've tested ST over-treated on a popular seed treatment versus ST on naked seed versus naked seed. And it's amazing to see what we see in cold germ scores by having ST on there. So I'm going to say anecdotally, I don't know that we have a ton of data right now that says if you use ST, it will aid your fungicide issue, the fungicide that's maybe on your treatment. But it does seem that our beneficial bacteria and fungi may be out-competing some of the negatives that are out there that we see when soils are cold and wet early in the spring.
Huh. Also, as I look down here, I see ethylene reduction capabilities, right? So ACC deaminase, which is a precursor to ethylene.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is, and I guess I've had a lot of people, have described to me is when I use 401, the first thing that I go do is I go dig roots because I can see that, right? And we think about ethylene and we talk about ethylene, but I think we think about it more with fungicides late season. We know that if a plant goes under any sort of biotic or abiotic stress, that plant releases ethylene and it starts to shut down, which is where a fungicide comes in and we spray a fungicide and we block that ethylene or we inhibit the ethylene and we keep those plants with some stay green or we keep them alive. And I just wonder, with the ACC deaminase or reducing ethylene, right? We think about planting corn into 45 degrees or 50 degrees, or maybe we plant it into 55, but we get a cold spell that goes down to 35 or 40. That would be a abiotic stress event, right?
It is, and what I think is kind of interesting about this is we think about ethylene and we think about when it's hot and dry and our corn plants are rolled up and they look like pineapples, right? And we've seen some stress mitigation from our biology at reducing that when we're hot and dry. But what you're talking about is when you're cold and wet early and you're getting that abiotic stress, and you'll have ethylene happen in those situations too, and that's that plant stressing as it's trying to grow. If we can block that out and we can keep those roots going in those less than ideal conditions, it helps us to power through some of those tough times.
Makes sense with what guys are seeing, what guys are sharing. I see there's a couple things highlighted at the bottom. We've talked a lot about phosphorus. We've talked a fair amount about nitrogen, and we've hinted about potassium. And I think that one's a little bit interesting. It was actually, again, go back to being vertically integrated. The benefits of it for you guys as our customers is we were actually doing an internal webinar and we were sharing the data. And I know that if you guys have followed on Twitter, either Sean or I or Biodyne Agronomy or BW Fusion, you probably have seen something about a trial booklet coming out. And that's probably what you're waiting on, right? You're probably like, all right, just shut up already, quit talking and let me see the data. We have seen now in a 3-year study that potassium levels behind the Meltdown 401 combination is significant. I would call it significant.
I think it's huge, yeah. And we've talked about it in a couple other videos too, as we've talked about potassium. We've kind of alluded to it. And so we are, actively looking at that, trying to get data. Our yield data and our tissue data and our soil data says that we have more phosphorus available when we utilize our 401s and our meltdowns or our 501 team. We are trying to get to the bottom of that and trying to understand like phosphorus solubilizing bacteria and understand what our current strains of biology are doing on the potassium side.
So the thing that I think is interesting, or the thing that maybe makes us a little bit unique is as soon as that webinar is done, one of our research guys, Lane, down at the lab in Sarasota, goes right to developing a medium or an agar to test and see whether we have any potassium solubilizing bacteria in our strains. And I can't let the cat out of the bag completely, but I'll give you a little bit of a hint, and the answer is yes. How many? You'll have to stay tuned for that. But that's another benefit of being a family-owned, family-run company, that we're focused on continually understanding what our microbes are, what our capabilities are, what they can do, what they can't do. And that gives us, Sean and I, sitting here in front of you today, the information to talk about things that we know, things that we can definitively prove, and then we're just not going to grab these things. So whether it's Sean or I that you have a conversation with, whether it's any one of our reps across the U.S., we're all going to lean back on this same thing. If you want to talk about diazotrophs, let's have the conversation.
Sure.
You want to talk about ammonifying microbes, we'll talk about them too. Phosphorus, no problem. We're going to talk about sulfur. We're going to talk about potassium. We've seen some interesting things with boron that we're going to talk about as well. I think it's just fascinating. And in a world of uncertain times as far as fertilizer prices go, if you can invest in microbes that are taking locked up mineral nutrition that is not available and you can make it more plant available, those products probably pay for themselves before the combine ever gets to the field.
Yeah, I think that, our measurement stick or our yardstick that we use, in agriculture is yield at the end of the day. And I think that's great. I think these products have been, 401 especially, at least a decade or coming on a decade of widespread use in ag. They've got yield data. We've got pictures. We've got, yield data. What we've been able to do with 365, and like you say, with the guys in the lab, with the vertical integration, is understanding what is in these products, understanding the biology, and understanding what they bring to the table. And so as we continue to go, just like you said, obviously yield's important, but the metric that we're looking at is just like what we described in the last video on the whiteboard, where we're looking at the economics of it. If we can confidently reduce your fertilizer investment using our biology, then we don't need the yield yardstick per se, because we're doing it in upfront input costs.